Without any further ado, we've got Mark Leary from IDC who's going to kick things off for us on the presentation side. He's got some really interesting data that he's going to share with you around what's happening in Wi-Fi on the network side, refreshes, what's going to happen in the next 12 months. So I think this is going to be quite an informative section for you all. So sit back and enjoy. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Don. Thanks for the introduction there. And Tom, thanks for your comments as well. And today we're going to be speaking very briefly about the network analytics and automation industry. And it's literally an industry unto itself with many different people offering many different types of solutions. But I'll talk about best practices that we're seeing from both suppliers as well as enterprises who are putting these solutions into practice. And we'll also focus the final portion on the business value study itself. Many of you have seen a copy of the report. I was involved in that study, came up with the interview guide and did some of the interviews myself. So it's a very interesting view of how we do these studies, and it provides some insights behind the results. And then we'll do a Q&A after I finish up talking on the business value study results themselves. Let's first lay the level set everyone, and many of you in the audience, especially, I'd be surprised if any one of you are not experiencing these pressure points. Is you've got tremendous pressure to support business transformation in your organization. You've got to develop the best possible user experience. You've got to provide absolute integrity of not only the network, but the resources that are connected to the network. And all of those connections to both end users as well as end devices in an IoT environment. You're trying to simplify your engineering and your operations, and also make sure you're getting the best use out of all of your resources. In the old days of network management, where we didn't have much visibility in our networks and how our resources were used, it was not uncommon for people to, once we got to 60% utilization of a router or a wide area network link, it was time to upgrade. Well, all of a sudden that leaves 40% that we never used. With increased visibility, we're able to use more of those resources more effectively for longer periods of time. We can operate in tighter thresholds. And that's really key to timing your upgrades properly. Again, getting the most out of every resource that you've invested in. And finally, that visibility adds to your ability to adapt, adding new devices, adding new applications, adding new users, adding new sites, adding new policies. These are all things, adding new technologies. These are all things that you're trying to do as you introduce some of those technologies we see on the right. And this is a short list. This is not even a complete list, because many of you, I'm sure, have multiple projects going on in this list, and even if you extend beyond this list, these are the technologies that are coming at you that are enabling your adaptation and are enabling to meet the needs of business transformation. But they also require significant investment themselves. They oftentimes will outdate what you have previously. So you've got to redo your legacy environment. And obviously all incorporate a tremendous responsibility to do systems integration right. And while you're trying to transform and introduce all these new technologies, you're trying to do it, it says with less, but for this slide, you could really say with the least. And it's not so much that budgets are lessening or the staff is less or that you have less tools, but you are trying to get by with the least amount of budget and the least amount of staff. You're trying to wring every ounce of productivity from every dollar spent, from every staff hour spent, every tool that you've invested in it that you're using, the training you're providing to your staff in order to build their own expertise. These are all things that you're trying to get away with to make sure that you're using as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And I'm reminded, I'm aging myself here, but I'm reminded of the Wizard of Oz when Dorothy and her three friends are going through the woods and they're thinking about all the possible hazards, and they're thinking of lions and tigers and bears, oh my. and they're roaming through the forest. And that's a lot like the network staff these days. A lot of technologies, a lot of business responsibilities, a lot of new roles that are required of the networking staff. And again, you've got to move forward, and you need tools that allow you to move forward. Network purchases reignited. We saw throughout COVID, and many of you experienced this firsthand, is COVID happened and suddenly the network was ran the gauntlet. Suddenly workers were changing their positions in the network. They were going home. New connections were sprouting up to other businesses as you tried to change maybe supply chains, or you tried to change how you were doing business with partners. Suddenly everyone was remote. But business needed to move on. It needed to continue to execute. That resulted in a lot of people taking a step back from investing in networking. All of a sudden, those router upgrades or those new switches you wanted to put in place, or the new Wi-Fi network you needed to put in place, suddenly a lot of those were put on hold because, who knew what the future held? Who knew how long the pandemic was going to last? And as we go into 2021 now, we're still battling the pandemic. But we are trying to get things back to normal. And we're trying to make up for lost time that we saw in 2021. That means we're spending again. It's funny, if we looked at the spending survey, and this question was asked in a survey that IDC did back in June, July timeframe, and we saw negative results for data center, for WAN, for enterprise campus LAN. The two places we saw positive investment were in network management and unified communications and collaboration. UC&C is obvious. In a work from home environment, in a remote environment, UC&C is a necessary tool to just do business. It's not just a convenience thing. And network management, the increase in spending there is a reflection of, through COVID, people were they were less concerned about what they were networking, that is buying new switches, buying new routers, upgrading devices, upgrading systems, things like that. They were suddenly much more concerned about how they were networking, where their staff was focused, what tools they were using to manage their network and manage an environment that had changed radically in the United States in early March, for the world, maybe a little bit sooner. And now you're seeing network management in the middle of this graph. Actually, investment in management continues on and actually overrides investment in data center networking and campus LAN, for instance. Wi-Fi is still a significant place where people are making an investment. The world has changed, right? Suddenly, we need to operate in a different world than we did prior to COVID. The users are more mobile, and devices are being connected up in an IoT scheme wirelessly. Wireless is becoming the predominant connectivity means, not just for the home or in remote locations, but even within corporate central cores and regional offices, and certainly in branches. And you see also up above there, cloud managed networking. People are looking for the same kinds of cost effectiveness out of cloud managed networking as they are from traditionally cloud managed computing and remote work solutions in a new world. We see some statistics later on in a couple of slides that show that the world has indeed changed relative to who is working remotely and how many of our end users are working remotely there. But again, here you see network management greatly influencing the growth. And to give you some idea, it was interesting. We've been doing surveys every couple of weeks throughout the COVID pandemic. And we've been watching these trends here. And it was interesting. There were two things of real note here. As you would guess, spending in unified communications and collaboration had stayed fairly positive through the pandemic. Makes perfect sense. Everyone's trying to communicate, collaborate remotely, so they make investments in UC&C. The other thing that was interesting is matching the growth and investment in UC&C was investment in network management systems. So suddenly people, and I can tell you all the investment in the infrastructure, data center, WAN, campus, all of that was down throughout 2020. And the reason for that is I think a lot of people were taking a step back and reassessing how they do networking. Not what they network, but how they do networking. And that focused a lot of emphasis on management systems and management practices, as well as the staff and what they're doing. And that's resulted in some real change. And those change are long running, as you see, and to tie it into 7SIGNAL, certainly, the upper bars there with the red arrows. So not only are people investing in smarter network management tools, but they're also very strongly focused on the Wi-Fi environment, remote work solutions, which makes perfect sense, and I have some data for that later on as well, and cloud managed networking. Cloud managed networking has a very interesting benefit, a number of interesting benefits for those people that are, again, figuring out how they want to do network management better, how they want to run their networks better. On the left side of the equation, you look at things that have changed. What are points of emphasis now since the pandemic hit? As we all know, in digital transformation, everyone was facing pressures to transform digitally over the last many years. COVID certainly served as an accelerant for all that activity. So had people examining how they do networking and what's changed. And so really very quickly after the pandemic struck, it was a discovery that we better automate more processes. We better rely more on the cloud. We saw a significant acceleration in cloud service adoption coming after COVID. So as successful as cloud has been the last 10 years, we ain't seen nothing yet. It is further accelerating due to its elasticity and flexibility that cloud brings. And one thing the pandemic has proven, that flexibility and elasticity is a real keys to success. And there you see too, again, focused on analytics, understanding what the network is doing. Now, what's changed permanently as we look at 2021 and beyond, what's changed permanently? And we'll see the next slide that talks about remote work. But again, that orientation around network management tools, more integrated and network security management. One thing the pandemic has driven is it has broken down some of the silos that we've seen traditionally between the network and security staff. You know, the acceptance of networking tools within the security domain is something that's accelerated as a result of the pandemic, and the ability for the network and security teams to work together really has been driven by necessity throughout the pandemic. You only have so many staff. Suddenly your users are spread all over the place. Threats are coming from every which way. And again, teamwork is really very, very important there. One thing on the lower end there is you see an increased focus on the end user. And again, driven by COVID, as people moved remotely, is the sudden focus on figuring out, what is the end user experiencing? What do they see? So instead of the network management staff just focused in on how are my routers performing? What's my utilization on my bandwidth links? How are the switches doing? How are my policies and such? All of a sudden, there was a much more spread focus towards the end user and what the end user sees. And I saw the poll earlier about remote working, and it does change organizationally. Tech employees, IT employees certainly have a lot more flexibility and tools available to them. So you see very high percentages of IT folks working from home over the last 11 to 12 months. And some of that will certainly continue. I saw 88% of you or something were dialing in remotely today. So that flexibility is great. But on a broader view of how the workplace has changed is that we look at before COVID, about 1 in 5 workers worked remotely. And this is across all industries, all size companies and everything. And again, another 17% or so worked in a hybrid environment. So they worked sometimes from home, sometimes from the office. In the post-COVID world, and you saw the thing kick up significantly, obviously, throughout COVID. And what happens as we settle in, as we start to emerge, and Lord knows we'd all like to emerge from COVID sooner rather than later. But as we emerge, what's the outlook? And you see significant uptick in both people working remotely full-time as well as hybrid. And I'll tell you, I think the hybrid number is an underestimation. I think that number, people have grown very used to not commuting. And I think that that hybrid number, which before might have been, 1 day a week or maybe 2 days a week, suddenly in the post-COVID era, could very well be, 2 or 3 days a week. So that could very well increase as well. And you look to the right there is how, we look at just the work from home users, how do they affect your help desk situation with performance issues? And again, these are people are operating at home, they're operating in a coffee shop or wherever, but they're operating not on the corporate network. So you have very little control over what they're doing. So there, agent-based views of their experience are absolutely critical to understanding what's going on in their environment. And again, you may not have control over the network infrastructure in their environment, but again, being able to see what they're seeing, because that's what's going to drive the help desk call. As soon as there's a slowdown, the help desk call happens. And as you see, the frequency of calls from work from home users, it's pretty frequent. And certainly anything you can do to drive those numbers down have a great effect on the efficiency of the staff and certainly on the satisfaction of the end user. I just wanted to take a look at network management products these days. It's a very simple diagram, but it's one that, I've been in the networking industry for a long time, and network management has really grown tremendously the last few years. And, it's been so very focused in on configuration and deployment for the first, few decades of the IP world and the web world. And now we're getting to a point where we're being much more proactive. We're operating with much more detail relative to understanding what's going on in the network. Obviously with 7SIGNAL, they're focused on that last wireless connection with the end user. But for, that also applies to the network in its entirety. Collecting data across the network, providing as intelligent analysis as possible. You see the incorporation of a lot of AI and machine learning algorithms involved in the analysis here. And finally, the automation that's driven by that smart analysis. The more data you have, the more accurate your analysis, and that drives a more precise and productive directed action. That's management automation. And let's face it, automation is a big priority for IT in general. In the surveys that we've done over the last 6-9 months or something, it is most common to have IT automation as the #1 focus for IT organizations. And that's not driven necessarily by COVID. It's driven by the fact that a lot of those things from the first slide, lots of technologies changing, demands by the business are changing. You've got to keep up. And the staff, the only way out of this is to understand how to take repetitive tasks, make them operate themselves. Again, how to fix problems and automate that process. So again, delivering a lot of productivity to the staff. And what about that staff? I've been looking at staffing and training for a long time now in networking, and it's funny, for the first last few decades, we've certainly been judged as networkers on the left side of the equation. How many sites do you control? How many devices do you control? How reliable is your network? What's the uptime? How do you operate within budget and such? Highly tactical responsibilities. So the role has been very technology specific, operating in a silo, and it's been very tactically focused. Well, in the digital business world, we're being asked to deliver more business outcomes, focus more on the end user, deliver the kind of services that allow the business to be very nimble and be ready for anything. Let's face it, digital is about speed of movement. So being able to be ready for that next digital application is really key to success. And as a result, that has networking staff, networking experts, the folks on this call, involved in many more projects, focused in on readiness as opposed to reliability, focus on business outcomes. Much more about, it's funny, for a long time, it's been focused on hardware longevity. How long can I make my router work? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 8 years? Now it's all about how quickly I can change out software and how can I create services faster. so that I can keep pace with digital. And that gives me, if the more that you automate and the more that you rely on systems to take care of those responsibilities on the left, the more that frees you up to do the responsibilities on the right. Because those left side things don't go away in the digital environment. I mean, but you want to be able to rely on systems to take care of that. Automated systems, analytics, and wherever you can get help on the left helps free up time on the right. And that's a big, as we'll look at the ROI study later on, that is a big factor in the move towards network analytics, not just in the Wi-Fi environment, but across the network in total. And from a career perspective for network staffers, this creates a lot more value for you to the organization. It gets you away from being, again, just a technologist focused on reliability and keeping the network up and such. Again, it gets you more involved with those lines of businesses, with strategic projects. It has you working across the aisle with security and application developers to make sure that, again, your network is ready for anything. The short list in looking at network management, and this is a lot of what I'd look for over the next couple of years as we go. And this is a short list. There's a lot of things that need to be adjusted, and you'll hear a roadmap from 7SIGNAL earlier, and some of this probably will show in that roadmap. I must say I haven't seen the roadmap presentation yet, so this is not driven by anything that they've included, but these are things that I look out over the industry and look at network analytics tools and automation tools, and where are the next big gains to be made. Automation gaps. There is a significant gap between all the data that we can collect across our network and all the intelligent analysis that we can do on that network data. And then what action can we take with that analysis? Today, it's about, hey, a lot of alerts go off and such, and the analysis can tell you which alert really matters. Some systems even provide some guidance in terms of, how you could maybe fix the problem. Maybe they offer options for you. But what we're looking for now are triggers that actually kick off automated functions that then take care of those problems for you. Or they react to a trend, or they react to a threat profile or something. So they take a much more active role once they've performed all the analysis. Cloud blind spots. Many of you are here focused in on your Wi-Fi network, and with the work from home pressures and all of that, and just the general mobility of the user population these days, and the addition of IoT devices through Wi-Fi connections, it's very typical these days. You're focused on Wi-Fi. But getting larger and larger are the blind spots associated with cloud. I'm sure many of you work in organizations that have a multi-cloud strategy, maybe a hybrid cloud strategy. So you've got a lot to pay attention to there, a lot of potential blind spots. And through our survey views and our own look at cloud service adoption, those blind spots are getting bigger. And as a result, knowing what's going on within those clouds is very important. And knowing what's going on around those clouds is very important, so that you can present evidence to the cloud provider when you're working together to resolve problems. Security exposure, it is it's interesting. It's kind of a dual-edged sword. On the one hand, network visibility, network analytics presents a wealth of information to help you strengthen your security posture. But what does that also do? It also makes you very vulnerable if somebody gets into your network and is able to have access to all of that information. The SolarWinds example is a good one here, where again, they use a very sophisticated technique to provide for functionality within the build process that allowed them to view what's going on within people's networks. So while you're looking at the details of their network and you're thinking about how to do network management better, and you're spreading some responsibilities for your network management across multiple people, just think to make sure, or maybe you're using outside vendors, cloud vendors or VARs or something, just remember that that's very vital information, shows a lot of what's going on across your network, where people are going, what they're doing, who's doing what, all of that. That's great information for you for network management. but it also presents some real security exposure. So be aware of that. Customer success. Tom mentioned in his talk, a very interesting thing is the education that they've been providing. I've been tracking network industry for a long time, and most networking purchases, you purchase a bunch of routers, you purchase a bunch of switches, whatever, you bring them on, you turn them on, you activate the service, and off they run for years and years, and that's great. I found with network analytics and automation solutions, it's very interesting to find that the oh wow moments can occur on day 2 of installation, but they can also take place 2 years after installation. You mean I can do that with this tool? And again, that customer success orientation, education that's provided by suppliers, the consultant service that's coming through for suppliers, them understanding you, them matching up your environment and your needs and your challenges against their product is very, very key. And finally, solution evolution. We want smarter analysis, AI, machine learning. The smarter the analysis, again, the more accurate the analysis. And that can kick off a world of great automation if you're doing it, be able to take those precise management actions. New technologies is the next Wi-Fi environment for you. Wi-Fi 6, is it 5G? The jury's out on that, and there'll be decisions made, but obviously the Wi-Fi implementations are the Wi-Fi is becoming, it's almost becoming, the standard connectivity for a lot of companies. And we saw that in the study here, where wireless connectivity was their first choice. And they only really rigged somebody up, they only tethered somebody in the rare circumstance. So that Wi-Fi connection is becoming the predominant connection for end users, and to the next point, IoT, end devices, those devices that are hanging off of your network. And there we're looking for more standards, more services, and all the things that you associate with technology that's moving forward. Finally, success. And many of you are here because you're users of 7SIGNAL, but one of the things that stands out from the ROI study certainly is this orientation around the user experience. Again, it's nice to understand what's going on within the underpinnings of the network, because that's supporting the end user. But it's the end user view that matters most. It's how productive they are, kind of response and reliability, and the kind of readiness you're delivering to that end user as they demand more and more. Simplifying tool sets, techniques, and teamwork. You have faced it, and I'm sure you're facing it even in your Wi-Fi environment. You probably have Cisco Wi-Fi or Aruba Wi-Fi, Mist Wi-Fi. You probably, there's a number of vendors that you have that are your Wi-Fi vendors, and all of them offer tools. And many of you probably use some of their tools. Many of you have supplanted their tools and really replaced them with 7SIGNAL. Maybe you're using them still as complements to one another. But undoubtedly simplifying the tool set, simplifying the techniques associated with network management, and also, as I mentioned before, that teamwork that's necessary, where the network staff are working with the security staff, working with the application development team, again, to make sure that everything is coordinated, because you've got a wealth of information that can really help those other teams. They just need to be able to accept it. And I understand that that is sometimes an organizational, political struggle, more so than a technical struggle. But that's breaking down. And certainly for C-level executives, they want that broken down completely. A proactive approach, be able to predict how the network is going, prepare yourself, do prescriptive management, understand where trends are moving. One of the great things with network analytics and this deeper visibility into networks is you can understand trends a lot more clearly. That allows you to operate with tighter resource constraints. All of a sudden, instead of getting nervous when a link reaches 60% or some device reaches 60 or 70% memory utilization or whatever, and all of a sudden you think, well, I better upgrade that device or get rid of it or replace it or whatever. The fact is that operating in tighter windows allows you to, again, use your resources more effectively and to better time the use of budget and resources to upgrade your network. As I said before, sharpen your network automation integration focus. Many of you engineers in the audience have probably learned a lot about Puppet and Python and Ansible. You may be using a lot of these technologies to automate. Just beware that there's a lot of tools out there that provide for automation that may be overlapping with what you're accomplishing. If you're writing some manifests that will reach out, grab some data, and provide you some information so that you can do some analysis, just realize that data may be available already to you. It may be a subject of analysis by a tool you already have. So really sharpen your focus. Make sure you're complementing the tools that you have. And finally, share the wealth. Data analysis, automation, these are all bubbling up towards IT automation, not just network automation, not just security automation. So again, this feeds a greater good, all of this activity. I'll switch to the ROI portion now and talk about the impact. And you can see as you move to the left there, a lot of people will focus on more timely problem resolution, being able to identify a problem quickly, being able to get to a root cause quickly, and then remedying the situation. And they'll also talk about resource optimization, again, operating in those tighter thresholds, being able to go to 90% on something before you do the upgrade, instead of having to go to 50 or 60% and having a lot of wasted space. I mean, that's the beauty of cloud services, let's face it, especially infrastructure as a service, where you can operate your servers to a very high extent and not have to spin up a new one until you're really up into the 90s of utilization, because you could spin them up so fast. And so that's coming towards networking with the more details you have about how your network is operating. And on the strategic impact side, IT credibility, user satisfaction, these are all things that we saw come out very strongly in the ROI study. And these have strategic impacts on the business. These are the people that you're serving. And IT credibility is critical here. As that first slide points out, the demands relative to digital transformation certainly are very focused on the IT organization. And as you CIOs and C-level executives are associated with IT in the audience, you know that credibility is everything. When you go out and talk to the line of business managers, the business executives, making sure that your systems, your underlying infrastructure are ready for that next step for them. And let's talk about the ROI study itself and go into some of the details here. Again, this was focused on 7SIGNAL Mobileye customers. Some had Sapphire Eye, but the focus was really on the Mobileye offering. And we had a series of qualitative and quantitative assessments, and we really looked at before and after. What were you doing before? What were your results before? And how did that change as a result of rolling Mobileye out to your users? And it rolled up all the costs, so initial costs, things like training and such, the ongoing cost, and deployment. We tended to, we see more deployment costs associated in the initial year than we do in the following year. So as a result, we factor that in terms of our cost structure. And again, we went after bigger companies, so good sized populations in terms of employees and IT staff, and a lot of different business applications. I'm sure you all look at the number of applications here and equate them to your own environment. This is coming from the technology staff, the IT staff. So who knows about shadow IT? You might be there might be a doubling of this if you really pull the entire organization. But again, good sized population of applications. And we cut across all industries. We had more healthcare than anybody. We really tried to get a representative view across industries so we could come up with good averages relative to what people were doing and the kind of returns they were making. In the system, I'll look at this from three perspectives in these three slides. One is on the system side, one is for the staff, and one is for the business, the user, and business and the user. In the system side, downtime, slowdowns, again, when you see the numbers earlier in terms of the work from home population, you can imagine that has a pretty big impact when you look at anything relating to downtimes or slowdowns. And the ability to solve those that much faster, this is all time that's given back to you. And also reduces the problems of finger pointing. Oh, it's not my problem, the network's fine, it's your problem, Mr. Security. or your problem is application, or your problem, Mr. Data. You know, it avoids that finger pointing issue. And that gets us to the root of the problem a lot faster. And also by optimizing network designs, even better is, I like the bottom one the best, the reduced number of issues to troubleshoot. Because every troubleshooting exercise, you know, the user is involved. Maybe they have to make, you have to make multiple calls with the user to determine what exactly is the problem. You want the user to send you some things. You want the user to do some things. All of that is very laborious for a user. And obviously, trying to find the root cause, it moves up through some sort of hierarchy of troubleshooters, and then eventually, you know, the problem is figured out. And so reducing time associated with that drives great time savings for the staff as well as users. And so good designs, improved deployment, not only improved deployment times, but also the accuracy of deployments. Now, those are all things that enable, again, reduce the number of issues to troubleshoot. And also you start to have a smaller list of things to run through that could be a problem. As you know, your design is proven, your deployment is very accurate. Again, these are all things that allow your system to, again, have greater reliability, less downtime, less slowdowns, and also more ready for anything, which is very important when you're dropping on new applications at the speed digital demands these days. Staff impact. The staff impact is dramatic. This is firefighting, finger pointing, problem identification. Think of what you all would went through before you had 7SIGNAL, when a wireless user called in and they had a problem. I can't, my applications are running slow. I can't get to this application. My network connection is down. What are the things that are, what are all the possibilities that you have to run through? Again, avoiding them is number one, and that's a great thing. But when they do pop up, the ability to get to them quickly, solve them, that goes to that earlier slide that I showed, where it starts to attack those issues on the left side of the equation of responsibilities. It starts to relieve you of that burden. And again, every bit of time saved allows you to be more effective in those strategic requirements. And this is not, I repeat, in the interviews we did, and no one reduced staff as a result of buying 7SIGNAL Mobileye. That's not what this is about. It's not like, oh, my full-time impact is I went from this to this. That saving translates to not less staff and less hiring, or even junior people replacing senior people. What that is that's over 2 full-time equivalents relative to contributing to more strategic areas of the company. And again, it's all with a network experience, but it's also with that security mindset that you have to have as a networking person. Again, making greater contribution, and also building your own strength in terms of your career and the value to the organization. And that translates to a premium for your salary. So again, this is not about this is not about reducing staff. This is about redirecting staff and doing things that are more valuable. For the business and users, small gains here produce tremendous gains in activity. So when you're looking at ROI and you look at how many outages per year does somebody have? How many help desk calls are they making? We showed a survey earlier for work from home employees and the number of calls they made per week. They're making, I think the biggest number was they're making about 5 calls per week. That's a significant amount of calls to have them involved in, to cause a firefighting drill in the support staff, within the technical staff. And again, the amount of productivity saved as a result of not having to make those calls, not having to deal, because before a user makes the call, most users put up with a lot. And so they could be operating in a slowdown mode for a day or two before they even make the help desk call. Some may call the second something happens and they really shouldn't have called right away, but again, helping them, avoiding problems on the one hand is fantastic. It keeps them from calling you at all, from seeing any kind of decline in productivity, but also just reducing the number of times they call. And then when they call and when they report trouble, being able to not involve them in the process. being able to take it on your own because you've got a system that already supports, and you can see because you've seen their experience, and you can look at that and say, okay, I don't need to talk to them about their experience and what they're doing and what kind of drivers they have or anything like that. I've got a tool that allows me visibility into that. So again, the ability to keep those users productive, to help avoid problems, keep them from seeing it, keep them from experiencing them. That boosts credibility with IT, certainly boosts the connectivity that support that. And think of this also. This was focused in on actual end users. It was not focused in on IoT devices, those devices that are growing more and more popular within all kinds of industries, manufacturing, healthcare, retail, you name it. We're seeing more and more IT devices dropping every day onto networks. And pretty soon, those IoT devices will outnumber end users. So with IoT and with the automated systems that they're driving, downtime for an IoT device can translate to just as much lost productivity and negative business impact as an end user being offline or an end user not being able to do what they need to do. Think of an IoT device that wants to do some giant upload at the end of the day, or is updating real-time information constantly. What's the price of that device suddenly going offline or being restricted in terms of how much they can download? That's a dramatic impact on the business and on the end users and those endpoints. And with that, I'll draw it to a close. I'm sorry I didn't have a clock in front of me, but I'm sure I spoke longer than I should have. But I think I moved this to a Q&A with Jim, as I recall.
Thanks, Mark. Excellent job as always. Just fascinating data that you and your team pulled together.